Hi everyone, and welcome back to Wild Side Wednesdays. This week we are going to discuss coral reefs and some of the critters that are found there. First, I just want to start by saying that corals are actually living animals, and they eat, they reproduce, they do everything that other animals still do. Now, however, they are sessile animals. They are attached to various substrates, so they do not move around. They will stay in that one location. But corals and the coral reefs themselves, guys, they do serve a very important role in the ocean within that ecosystem. According to the Kumalipo, life began with the coral polyp. And as more and more life began, was born, then life got more and more complex. And with that, it is believed that corals are an Akua, or a deity, and that they are actually responsible for the life and death of natives to the Hawaiian culture. So corals themselves have a huge cultural significance to the Hawaiians, and it's not always understood, but it truly just shows why we continue just to be drawn to them and just amazed by all that they are and all that they provide. And here within the Hawaiian Islands, the oldest of the coral reefs is actually located on Maui, and that mother reef is said to be about 600 years old, and she has about 1,000 acres of coral reef. And here within the Hawaiian Islands, there is approximately 410,000 acres of coral reef alone, and that is just in the main Hawaiian Islands, and that is larger than the size of Oahu. Now, within those coral reefs, like all across the Hawaiian Islands, guys, there's about 1,250 unique species. That is phenomenal, and that just shows how biodiverse these coral reefs are. So I mentioned that term, biodiversity. That just shows that these coral reefs have an abundance of plants, animals, all living through them. Anywhere from zooplankton and phytoplankton to just the everyday reef fish to sharks. So you have every level of that food chain covered, everywhere from the bottom to the top. Now, with that biodiversity, I'm going to cover just some of the animals that we might see out there. First, we have our Echinoderms. Those are going to be your sea urchins and sea stars and sea cucumbers. These guys are actually water vascular animals that have tube feet all across them, so they actually use those little tube feet to move across little substrates, and even just attach themselves during tough times. And also they have a radial symmetry. So what will we see? We might see the crown of thorns sea star. We might see a cushion star, the rock boring urchin, the long spiny urchin, some red pencil urchins, and maybe we'll even find some sea cucumbers just chilling along the bottom. And those little sea cucumbers, they do kind of look like slugs down there, but they're kind of cool. They are completely full of water when they are nice, big, and fat, but when they feel threatened, they will actually shoot that water out of their bodies, and at that point, their bodies will go from a very large size to a small one, and it's very, very tight now, so it's harder to kind of break through that skin of theirs. The next set of critters we might see are our chordates, or basically all of our animals that have a vertebral column. These are going to be anywhere from our mammals, the monk seals. Sometimes our dolphins are present at these reefs. We'll have our turtles, those lovely sea turtles representing the reptiles. Of course, our reef fish, and you might also find some eels chilling out there from time to time. All right, the next set of organisms we'll probably see are crustaceans. That's right, guys. You might see some lobsters chilling around some of the coral reefs. You might see some crabs. Maybe if you get lucky, you'll find some shrimp. Those crustaceans are usually pretty easy to identify. They usually have a very hard exoskeleton. They'll have a pair of antennae on their head, as well as a pair of appendages. Usually you'll see those claws coming off of the lobsters or the crabs. And another thing is, usually these little guys are going to eat the little critters that are already decaying. So they do a little bit of cleaning up as well. And another one is going to be our mollusks. One of the most common ones is going to be our octopus. You'll see some limpets sometimes, and one of my favorites is going to be the tiger cowrie. Our mollusks have a couple of different descriptions. They have a bilateral symmetry. When it comes to their bodies, they actually have a foot, and they have shells most of the time, even if you think they don't have one. And they also have a mantle. And finally, we have the cnidarians. This one's a very big topic to discuss because our corals themselves are cnidarians. And through this phylum are also jellyfish as well as sea anemones. That's right, corals are related to jellyfish. And all of these have what we call cnidocytes. Cnidocytes are little stinging cells that are through their bodies so that if you touch them, they are able to defend themselves by using that stinging cell, as well as using those stinging cells to bring in their prey if they need to. Now, here in the Hawaiian Islands, some of the most common corals we see are the hard corals. Hard corals get that hard structure based on the skeletal-like structure that they have that is made out of calcium carbonate. And that is what gives it its structure. It's what makes it to where it's not really flowing through the water as much as our soft corals would. And our corals also have a symbiotic relationship with zooxanthellae. The zooxanthellae are a photosynthetic algae that live inside of them, and they will actually get their nutrients from the sunlight, and then the corals can get some nutrients from those zooxanthellae. But then also these corals can eat little plankton as well. Alright, so corals will actually reproduce in two ways, asexually and sexually. Now, our hard corals, they are sexual animals. You're probably wondering how. What they do is they will actually release their gametes, both the sperm and eggs, and they will drift up into the water column, and they will eventually flow into each other. When this happens, when they connect, a planula or a coral larva is going to form. This will then drift along the top of the water for a couple of days, maybe a week. And then once it does that, it'll eventually settle down to the bottom and it'll attach itself to a substrate. When it does that, that planula is going to turn into a polyp, and that polyp is going to grow over time. So then when you get multiple polyps that are attached to each other, eventually you're going to get a coral reef, because all of those corals are growing from those polyps. When it comes to the sexual reproduction of corals, those can actually be seen various times of year, and it really depends on the moon phases, but it's definitely a sight to see. So coral reefs actually serve a very important role in our world. While they only cover a small fraction of the Earth, they do produce about 50% of our oxygen, and they take in about 1/3 of the world's carbon dioxide. They also serve as a barrier to protect land from storms or waves, and they will help with erosion as well. The coral reefs are also there helping in the world of medicine, and when it comes to the fish life, they serve as a nursery, as a nice little safe haven for the young to hide from the prey as well as getting food. Some of the common threats that coral reefs face are from pollution or chemical damage, people touching them or even stepping on them, have overfishing. Some other threats that these coral reefs face are the rising temperatures. As we are looking at climate change, those rising temperatures are very tough on them. Corals are very sensitive animals. As the water temperatures rise, ocean acidity changes, salinity changes, all of that can change how they are. And you will eventually see coral bleaching, and they're not necessarily dead at that point, but they are lacking nutrients during that point. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video and that you're able to put this information to use on your next visit to the beach or even snorkeling. And if you want to further your knowledge on corals, feel free to check out Netflix and look up the awesome documentary Chasing Coral.